So this is India, and I'm Amy, and we are part of Just Love, which is a sort of charity, national charity committee, and there are a load of students here on campus who are involved with Just Love. So we're hosting this event today, and we are a group of students who are pursuing the biblical call to social justice. And if anyone's interested in being more involved with that, then just talk to us about it or find us on Facebook. But without further ado, we'll introduce Rachel, who's here with us today, from Hope for Justice. So Rachel, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Rachel. Thank you first so much for inviting me along. This is my first time in Bath, and it's really, really nice city. You guys live in a really nice place. I love it. I work for a charity called Hope for Justice. They're based up in Manchester, but I work for them from Exeter remotely. And Hope for Justice are a charity which work with to identify and support survivors of human trafficking. So yeah, it's a big issue. Has anyone here ever heard of human trafficking before? Awesome. Do people know much about what it is? Have you kind of got a roughly? So basically, I'll go very briefly. Human trafficking is the official definition is the transportation, harboring, receipts of persons by means of deceit, coercion, force, etc., for the purpose of exploitation, and that can be in many different forms. So I work with people who have been rescued from those situations of exploitation. It's basically modern day slavery, and I work with them to help them rebuild their lives again, basically.
So you are a Christian. Can you tell us a bit about how you came to know God?
Yeah, I am a Christian, yes. So how did I come to know God? So I know how I came to know God. I'm just thinking best way to start. So I grew up, there's a little bit of background about me. I grew up, my family went to church when I was younger. My parents, they didn't grow up as Christians, but they each became Christians when they went to university. And so when I was growing up, I went along to church with them. So I kind of grew up seeing and hearing about who God was, hearing stories of how God had changed people's lives. But I didn't make the personal decision that I wanted to follow Jesus and have him as part of my life until I was 8 years old. And I went to a concert. It was a Christian concert, and it was actually for adults and teenagers. And I was going along because my dad was helping out at the event. And they said at the end of the event, they kind of shared who Jesus was. They shared, about salvation. They shared about they invited people basically to want to invite him into their lives. And I was 8, and I was really connecting with it, and there was a real pull in me. So I stood up and I was like, yeah, that's something I really want to do. So my dad prayed with me, and I said, okay, Jesus, my life isn't mine anymore, it's yours. And that was a real big step for me. And then the following year I got baptized. But one thing which I had always really struggled with throughout my life, so even though I became saved. I don't know what your backgrounds are, but different churches have different understandings of it. But it's all the same. You're a Christian when you know Jesus as Lord and Savior of your life. But the terminology which is often used is that you're saved. And when I stepped into that salvation and I guess became saved and got to know Jesus when I was 8, that didn't mean that my life was perfect, and I still struggled with a lot of things. So I knew Jesus and I would pray to him and I knew him as my hope, but I didn't necessarily turn to him and live my life for him as I should have done. That was a journey which I went through the rest of my years. So when I was a teenager, I went very much away from God. And the reason I share this is because I'll share in a minute, but when I was a teenager, I really struggled with my identity and who I was. So as much as my home was a Christian home, it wasn't necessarily a very happy home. And I struggled a lot with who I was. My mum was very unwell, and so I didn't have much of a relationship with her. And so that is often the foundation of someone's identity. So I often started to try and find my identity in other things. So I found it in hanging out with different groups. And when I was in high school, I think I must have gone through every single possible group you could have been through. I was with the chavs and then the emos and the scene kids, if you remember all those. But it was like I was having an identity crisis. And I was trying to find my hope in all these other things and found they didn't satisfy. And being very real with you, I got to a point of being really depressed because I just found like I didn't know who I was. And I was trying to look for that acceptance from people, and they couldn't give it to me. And I always felt rejected. And I really struggled with that for quite a long time. And then it led me into, I started doing all these things which I knew God didn't approve of. And I started to feel really lost and felt like he'd abandoned me. And I felt like I was too scared to go to church because I felt like church judged me. Until I met a friend, and she was a Christian. She hadn't known me growing up. And I shared with her, I was like, I think actually I used to know Jesus, and I've lived my life now where I'm apart from him, and I've made my own decisions, and I know I've done things which he doesn't approve of, and I don't think he can forgive me anymore, and I'm really lost. And I was really, really broken at that point. And she said to me, she didn't really understand much about why I thought that. And so she went and spoke to her dad and kind of asked him questions because her dad was a church leader. And she came back to me and said, no, you haven't you're not lost. God still does forgive you. And that was a journey which I went on of knowing God's forgiveness for me. From the age of, I would say, 17 was when things started to really turn around. I went to like a big Christian event as well called Soul Survivor, which some of you might have heard of. It's where loads of teenage Christians meet once a year, and it's time of worship and learning more about who God is and meeting other Christians and non-Christians, people who don't, all together. And I felt God really spoke to me there. And I feel like I'll put this in a way people understand. God became very real to me in a way that I could physically feel him, and I was very aware that he was not just an idea anymore, but it was almost like he was right in front of me, and I was having this, we call it an encounter, but it's like just meeting him face to face, and that started to, I didn't see him, but I was just aware that he was there, and he was alive, and that he was with me in a way that people couldn't necessarily persuade me theologically, but I knew because I could feel him there and I could sense him there, and I was aware, okay, gosh, God is here. Thank you that you've forgiven me. Thank you, you've not left me. And it was like he made himself real to me, and he made me aware of him at a point where I felt he'd abandoned me in a physical way that you couldn't really describe with human words. I don't know if that makes sense. It's really hard to explain, but I wanted to share because I think sometimes we can get so caught up in theological argument, but if it doesn't actually hit us in our hearts, and if we don't actually know Jesus personally, there's almost no life in it. And I'm not saying you have to have that encounter with God, that face-to-face encounter, but what really changed me was I knew that I knew that I knew that I knew. It wasn't a theological persuasion. It was I knew that God is with me, and no one could convince me otherwise, because it was like I'd met with him at that point. So from then on, I started to go on a journey of living my life for him more. But there was still a lot of stuff I needed to work out. And so I realized that a lot of my Christian walk, I'd been living thinking that I need to live to please God and to be accepted by him. And so often people see Christianity as this way of living a good life so that God accepts you and you can get to heaven. But that's absolutely not what Christianity is. That's not what Jesus died for. Jesus died so that people who didn't know him and that people who were sinners and completely lost could find a way back into the relationship with the Father who made them at the very beginning. And that was something that Jesus started to unravel to me as I started to live my life following him. And really all a Christian is what I've realized. It's really simple. Sometimes we try and overcomplicate it. A Christian really simply is someone whose life is following Jesus and wanting to know him more day by day, who believes that he is Lord, who believes that he died, believes that he rose again, and accepts the free gift of salvation from our sins, from our past, from our failures, from any bit of darkness it's a free gift into his kingdom of light and salvation. And that's the journey which I'm on now. So the reason I say, when you say, when did you become a Christian? I think I actually became a Christian officially when I was 8, but as in what I would say when I gave that commitment, but Christianity is something that you learn more and more every day, and there's more of Jesus to know every day, and there's more of his love to know every day. And I think every day that you walk with him, you realize, gosh, there's so much more. Jesus, did I even know you back then? And then sometimes I look at my life, I'm like, Jesus, did I even know you then? And he says, yeah, you did. And he reminds me of things, but I'm like, but God, I know you so much more now, and there's so much more to you now. And that, I guess, is, I've started on that adventure with him of knowing him more day by day when I was, that's how it, sorry, really long, but what you wanted to share.
No, it's really good. It's great. So you're telling us about how sort of it's not just a maybe head and thinking thing through the theology, but also it's a connection of that with the heart and how that then moves us each day to live. And so, okay, so that's an everyday thing. What does it mean to you? Obviously, you're working for Hope for Justice, a social justice organisation. So what is the link for you? How do you understand that faith and social justice come together and make a difference in your life? And maybe explain a bit about what you understand social justice to be.
Great. Cool. Social justice, to be honest, the term, I guess I wouldn't know exactly what social justice is defined by, but I know the things that kind of come under that umbrella. So obviously, helping the poor, helping the oppressed, helping find freedom for people who are captive, things like that. I guess, obviously I'm working for an anti-human trafficking charity, and that I know that obviously comes under the umbrella of social justice. That connects with my faith. I've shared with you that very much my faith was learning that salvation is not about what I can do, it's about what Jesus has done for me, and that we all can find hope in him. So when I was at university, that was when I kind of started to live my life for him and kind of free from the restraints of my past, I guess. And he started to show me things when I was at university. And now I can see that that was him, but at the time I didn't realize it was him so much. So I'd be like walking down the street, and I would see a homeless person, and it's very easy to just walk past, and you can't stop next to every homeless person because I think you'd never get home, which is the sad fact of homelessness in our society today, is that there's so many people you really would never get home if you stopped at every person. But there'd be certain times I'd walk past someone, and then there would just be a real pull in me, like, no, you have to speak to this person. So there would be times where I'd like walk 10 steps and like to the next street even. I'd be like, I can't walk away from this person. So it was like it was like a magnet. I'd be drawn back to this person. And I didn't really know what to do or say, but I knew that Jesus loved them. So I was like, okay, I'm going to speak to them and, maybe buy them a sandwich or something. And I have to say, in speaking with them, I found some of the most courageous people I've ever met in my life, and some of the most inspirational people. So open and so humble. But the sad fact is that a lot of them just they feel really lost and feel really abandoned. And I think I grew up thinking that people who were homeless, people in those situations, they did it to themselves, and they messed up their lives because they did something stupid. But actually, through conversations with people, I realized they've had it really tough. And some people may have messed up in order to become homeless, but who are we to say to them, oh, well, that's your fault, you don't have another chance? Because my journey with God was very much, I knew him, I went away from him, he gave me another chance even when I didn't deserve it. So what I started to realize when I was speaking to these people was, gosh, God, you've given me another chance when I've messed up over and over and over again. And in honesty, I mess up every single day, and I think we all mess up every single day. And if it really was about what we did, none of us would ever make it. But I was like, Jesus, if you've forgiven me, and if you've given me this hope and this joy, despite what I've done and despite the failures I make, how can I not forgive this person and give an opportunity for this person. And there's actually a scripture in the Bible that says that. And it says, for those of you who don't know it, there's a master, and he has someone who works for him, and this person owes him loads and loads of money, and he says, but the master says, okay, well, because the person who owes him money goes, master, I'm so sorry, I owe this debt, will you please forgive me? And he forgives him all of his debt, and he writes it off. But then the person who's been forgiven goes, and he has people who owe him money who are below him, and he doesn't forgive them. And the master says, you wicked, evil servant, I forgave you. How could you not forgive them? And I started to realize that we have a responsibility to extend the forgiveness God gave to us that we do not deserve to other people. When Jesus says to his disciples, in the end times, there will be people, am I right? And I will say, I was hungry and you fed me. I had no clothes to wear and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. Welcome into my kingdom. And then to those on the left, he will say, I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was in prison and you abandoned me. You don't have a place with me. And I started to realize that God has given us an amazing opportunity to know him, an amazing opportunity into eternal life. And that is for everyone. And people who have been oppressed and downtrodden, who, whether they're homeless, whether they're caught up in human trafficking, whether they're in domestic violence, whether they're in prison, whether they're caught up in gangs, whether they've got drug addictions, whether they've got alcohol addictions, whatever that is, they are all under an oppression which Jesus wants to set them free from in the same way that he set me free. And the reason that I'm passionate about social justice is because I see it as an incredible opportunity to get to show them that there is a hope and that there is a life and that they don't have to live as a subject of their circumstances anymore, but they can have another opportunity to rebuild their lives and make it something and find that value that God put in their lives in the first place. So yeah, that's why I'm passionate. Does that answer the question, or did I go off on too much of a tangent?
That was great.
Okay,
Really
great.
Yeah, thanks. So you're working with like clients kind of face to face with Hope for Justice. So could you tell us like a story of maybe one of your clients that have found like hope and value in knowing God?
So there's one girl I worked with called, actually one of my colleagues worked with, called Natasha. And we met her several years ago, in 2013. Might have been 2012, 2013. And she was a survivor of sex trafficking. So she'd been, she came over to the UK, thought that she was going to do like regular work, be employed, have accommodation, and she was tricked, and she was forced into sexual slavery, and she was prostituted out to man after man after man after man, and she lost all sense of self-worth, all sense of self-value, was really depressed and really hopeless. She developed an alcohol addiction as a way to cope with the stress and to cope with the trauma of what had happened to her. They call it self-medication. So we worked with her for many years up until, we worked with her many years, and there were many times where she would call the office, because of my work, I'm not a support worker, but I put people in connection with networks, and the idea is that we follow people through until full recovery, and we kind of guide them along the process. And she would call our office in desperation because she'd gone from her supported project, and she was drinking, and she was going to take her life, and there was at least twice I had to talk. She would call me and she was suicidal, and I would have to talk her out of that. And it happened to my colleagues as well. And she risked losing her accommodation at her supported housing because she was so addicted to alcohol, and she was inviting friends in to drink because she felt so lonely, and she just got herself into spiral after spiral after spiral. Anyway, she ended up having to leave that accommodation, and we found another accommodation for her, which was a Christian project. And Natasha went into that accommodation, and I think there was what they did as part of their program, it's very much kind of supportive, use professional techniques, but they also give people an opportunity to know who Jesus is. Within 2 months, I think, or I won't give you a timescale because I may get it completely wrong, but there was a certain period of time, and she came to know Jesus. And she called us and she said, "I'm so excited. I know who Jesus is now, and I'm praying, and I asked him to come into my life." And that was obviously really exciting for us because we were Christians. But the best thing was that her whole recovery process just transformed from there. So even the first 2 months that she'd been in this project, she'd still been really struggling with suicidal thoughts, really struggling with alcoholism, was still really, really struggling. And as I said, she had been for years. She'd been losing loads of jobs and things because she couldn't hold it down because of her addiction. And when she came to know Jesus, it was honestly like we started talking to a different person. She had hope again, and when you called her, it wasn't hopelessness, but she just had so much joy in her voice. And she's come so far now. She's cooperating with the program, and she's like building step by step. She's starting working again. But the best thing is, it's not even that she's got a job or whatever, but it's just when you speak to her, the joy in her voice and the life in her voice. Whereas before she wanted to take her life, now she knows that her life is worth something because she knows the one who made her. And she knows that God made her for a purpose and that he made her with intention in mind. And she knows, she's not told me this, but you can see the difference in her because she has a sense of self-worth again, and she has that hope in Jesus. And she'll tell us about that. But it is honestly like you're talking to a different person. And her recovery it's just been up and up and up. She's not drunk since, and I can honestly say that change happened when she knew Jesus. And that was an eye-opener for me, because sometimes as Christians, we can say, "Oh yeah, come," because we know that like knowing Jesus is really, really good for you, and we forget the difference he's made in our lives. And when I saw that transformation, I was like, "Wow, Jesus, like, look what you've done!" Like, and it was so clearly him. There was nothing else because everything else had stayed the same, apart from that she knew Jesus, and that was the thing that had changed. Obviously, she changed supported housing, but they did all the same kind of standard techniques and stuff, and that was the thing that changed. And that was just for me. It was just amazing to see.
Thanks very much for sharing that.